Remember the movie Cocoon? You know, Cocoon, directed by Ron Howard, starring all those lovable old people. Don Ameche won an Oscar for it. Wilford Brimley, Hugh Cronin, Steve Guttenberg, Brian Dennehy. It was a great movie that we all loved back in the 80s. And in fact, it was a massive blockbuster, grossing something like $85 million in 1985 dollars. And it even got a sequel, which, well, not a lot of people liked. But here's something kind of fascinating. Cocoon is a movie that is almost impossible to find these days. You cannot get it on Blu-ray. It is not available streaming on any service, and you can't buy it digitally either. What's funny is that Cocoon The Return, the sequel that nobody liked, is very easy to find, but for some reason, the original film has just disappeared. So, why am I mentioning Cocoon? Because Cocoon is the reason you should never get rid of your Blu-rays or DVDs. Now, something inevitable started to happen during the pandemic. Hardcore movie fans stopped buying Blu-rays. Maybe it was the fact that we were all stuck at home and weren't going to stores, or perhaps it was the closure of all of our favorite mom-and-pop physical media stores. Fans started to build digital libraries rather than physical ones, and I get it. One of the reasons I got into buying movies on iTunes was that whenever a fancy new 4K restoration came out, iTunes would automatically upgrade the version that you already bought. But as Christopher Nolan warned recently, you should buy the movies you love on physical media because when you own something digitally, you don't really own it. Digital copies are basically long-term rentals. While you can be reasonably sure that the digital copy you buy will stay in your library for a long time, there's no guarantee that it'll be available forever, like a piece of physical media. Rights ownership changes, and movies suddenly drop out of circulation. If you own a digital copy, there's no guarantee that one day, when you access your library, you might find a couple of titles missing. Movies simply vanish, and that's really what happened to Cocoon. What's interesting also is that different cuts of the movie become popular or become the only versions that the directors want you to see. The most infamous example of this, of course, is the special edition version of the Star Wars trilogy. The only legitimate versions of the original theatrical cuts are the non-anamorphic Laserdisc transfers that George Lucas released on DVD many years ago. But you cannot legitimately find a good copy of the original theatrical versions. If you want to find those, you really kind of have to turn to piracy. There are a lot of examples, though. I own Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice digitally, and one day I found that the theatrical version had been replaced with Zack Snyder's restoration, which reframes the IMAX sequences to 4:3, which is something I'm honestly not a massive fan of. Yet, this is the version I'm stuck with if I want to watch the theatrical version. Directors sometimes do this, with a notable recent example being a censored version of The French Connection that William Friedkin had released digitally shortly before he passed away. The only version you can watch digitally now is censored. You can still find the original cut on DVD and Blu-ray, but digitally, it's the censored version. This is why physical media matters. When you buy a Blu-ray, or better still, a 4K Blu-ray, you in some ways become a custodian of that film. Think about it. You own a very good mastering of one of your favorite films. If something happened and that movie ever went out of circulation, that copy you hold physically still exists. Now, I know with DVDs, there's kind of some rot to them, and after a while you can't really play them anymore. But Blu-rays are much better that way. They last a long time. While it's unlikely a significant movie will ever one day completely vanish, I bring you again to the strange case of Ron Howard's Cocoon. Walt Disney, who owns the studio that originally released the film, 20th Century Fox, still likely has a great 4K master of the movie in their vaults. They're not making it publicly available for whatever reason, and I know what you might be thinking. Maybe Disney is working on some restoration of Cocoon, but the fact that the movie was missing was brought to the public attention about 3 years ago by a writer named Mike Ryan, who wrote for Uproxx and was wondering why it was so hard to find. 3 years later, it's still impossible to find. Sometimes it takes a while. For many years, James Cameron's The Abyss was pretty much impossible to see, and the same strangely was the case with True Lies, and it was because James Cameron's Lightstorm Entertainment had some complicated rights issues, and the studio needed his green light to release these new masterings on physical media. Cameron has finally got around to re-releasing those movies, but some of them still aren't available, such as Strange Days. You can watch it digitally on HBO Max in a really nice HD transfer, but you cannot own a copy. Another movie I really liked, Martin Campbell's No Escape, starring Ray Liotta, was completely unavailable for many years, and it was just recently released on a very interesting label that's appropriately named called Unearthed Films, because really, it's been unearthed. So all that said, keep collecting Blu-rays and DVDs. While they're making a comeback on the niche market, these physical copies of the movies still matter, even if digital versions are cheaper and more convenient. Because at the end of the day, unless you can hold a copy of that movie in your hands, well, you don't really own it.